I don't want to set the world on fire.
Hi everyone, this is Violet Irwin. I'm here today for another one of my car confessionals. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening to this video or watching this video, whichever way you're enjoying it today. What I wanted to do today was discuss one aspect, or one of the more tricky aspects rather, of having a philosophy like I've created. So really what I want to do today is discuss how abortion fits in to my Property Manifesto that I discussed in a previous car confessional. So if you recall, I posit that there are 4 kinds of property: real property, personal property, property of body, and property of mind. Now, my contention is that all rights and liberties actually originate out of these 4 kinds of property ownership. And if we could only come to understand all 4 of these kinds of property ownership, we'd have a lot greater understanding of how to arrange our rights and how to better understand our liberties. So, why is this relevant to abortion? Or how does it impact abortion? So, the way that this is relevant to abortion is not 100% clear, because you would think we're talking about property rights, what does that have to do with this? And hey, ownership of body, like if a woman owns her own body, can't she have an abortion? You know, you get into basic stuff like that. But it's really not that simple. And I'm going to explain why, but to start with the explanation, I'm going to talk to you guys about a little case law. Now, the name of the case is actually kind of irrelevant, because what you need to know is just the facts. But this is a classic case you learned in your first year of law school, and the lesson that it teaches you is what's called trespass by necessity. So, in law, we have an idea called a trespass, and we all know what that is. That's the idea that you are on another person's property without permission. And it's the easiest to think of a trespass in terms of real property, because if somebody walks on your land and you don't want them there, that's a trespass. Similarly, you could trespass to chattels, as it were, and that is basically doing something to someone else's personal property that in effect makes you the possessor of it, and therefore, you know, it's kind of, I don't know, you're basically committing offense against personal property, and that's called a trespass to chattels. But I bring this all up because in the case that I mentioned, the facts of that case were as follows. So a landowner has land that's backed up to or on the side of a coast, okay? And with that, he has a dock where ships can, you know, kind of dock and stop and whatever. But it's his land, so it's his dock. Now what happens is there's this horrible storm, which in Old English speak they refer to as a tempest. So there's a tempest that really messes up the water, and a guy on a boat crashes into the dock that the property owner has, causing some damages. Now, the idea is it okay at that point for the landowner to say, you're trespassing on my property, and therefore, I don't care how bad the weather is, you have to go you have to go face the tempest yourself. I don't really care, you know, if your life is in danger when I expel you from my land. You know, you're trespassing and you fucked up my dock, and so, you know, I'm gonna sue you, right? But the issue that the court thought was the most compelling is this idea of necessity, okay? So in that instance, the trespasser, really the only reason they were staying on that land is because if they had to leave, they would die, right? Like the risk of death from going back out to sea was so high that, you know, you can't, the trespass is less of a harm, right? Because messing up someone's dock is not as bad as loss of life, right? So what the court held in that case was that the landowner, because he had his property damaged, right? I mean, the boat knocked into the dock and it caused damages. So to the extent that the trespass caused damage, the the guy in the ship is liable to the landowner for the amount of damage that it caused, right? But that does not mean that the landowner has the right to exclude him from the land during the time that it's still too dangerous to leave. So, basically, the whole thing in layman's terms is, listen, you trespassed, okay? And the stuff that you messed up, you have to pay for. But just because it's a trespass doesn't mean that I get to devalue your life as a human. So your life as a human is still worth more than the damage to my property that happens as a result of you trespassing on it. So, while it's still a trespass, and while you have to pay for the damages that occur as a result of the trespass, it is not, in fact, you know, it is not a grievance so actionable that exclusion from property is warranted when such exclusion would cause, you know, death, in effect. So now, it seems like, well, you're talking about tempests and boats and land. How does all of this have to do with a woman, or with an abortion, or with a baby, or any of that? And this is my thesis. My thesis is that an unwanted pregnancy is a trespass by necessity. Okay, and I'm willing to give the pro-choice activists this. Okay, the baby growing in the womb could not live without the mother. Okay, so the baby is parasitic on the mother, and in instances of rape and incest, the baby is in there out of no choice of the mother, right? So you've got a trespass. The baby is trespassing on the mother's property of body. Okay, so that's how I would say it. There's a trespass on the mother's property of body. Now, does that trespass allow the mother to exclude the baby when such exclusion will cause that baby's death? No, she doesn't. Even in the case of rape and incest, she doesn't, and here's why. The fact that the baby is trespassing does not give the woman carte blanche right to decide that baby's life, right? Just because the ship owner was trespassing when the boat hit the landowner's dock did not give that landowner the right to expel that ship, the ship captain, as it were, into the sea to his death. In the same way that the guy who was shipwrecked was trespassing out of no choice of his own, so too is a baby trespassing on a woman's property of body in cases of rape and incest out of no choice of that woman's own. But in both instances, the right to exclude does not extend so far that the exclusion will cause the death of the individual being excluded. My thesis is that an abortion, in effect, is someone, when there's a trespass by necessity happening, decides to exclude that person from their property at the expense of that person's life. And in our common law, it's not okay. And here's the other bad news for pro-choicers underneath my theory of property, okay? Unless it's rape and incest, it's not even a trespass by necessity. In fact, it's not a trespass at all. So, if you voluntarily... Oh, okay, I have to explain another legal concept before I can do this. You are responsible for the probable results of your own actions in tort law, in common law, okay? So, for example, if you have someone who's about to sit in a chair and you are like, oh, here, I'll pull out this chair for you. And then you pull a trick on them where at the last minute you pull the chair out and they fall and land on their butt, okay? You knew that they were about to sit in that chair. And when you pulled that chair out, you knew that they would hit the ground, right? So in that instance, that's actually a battery, because you knew that the most probable consequence of your action was going to be an injury, okay? So let's apply that to sex and to all this other mess. So if you have consensual sex and that results in a pregnancy, that's not a trespass. You invited that baby in there because the probable consequence of sex is pregnancy, right? I mean, yeah, there's birth control and there's, you know, there's other ways to get around it. But in truth, the probable consequence of intercourse, or one of the most probable consequences of intercourse, is pregnancy. So, to me, in that instance, the baby's not trespassing. The baby has every legal right to be there. And in those instances, not only would it be wrong to exclude the baby from the mother's body, causing that baby's death, but the baby would not even be liable to the mother for any harm that the pregnancy does to her, because the baby is there in an invited fashion, okay? So, and I know people want to say, oh, this is all legal jargon mumbo jumbo, but really, this is important. This is important. These are legal doctrines that have governed property in our country since our country was founded, because these legal doctrines were guiding British law, right? So, you know, this is important stuff. But I bring this up because I feel like we get so lost in this whole idea about where the life starts, and, you know, but it's my body, it's my choice, and like all this other crap, okay? Here's the truth. If a woman gets pregnant as the result of consensual sex, and she kills that baby, I don't see how that's not a crime, right? I mean, maybe, personally, I don't think this should be true. Maybe people want to have slightly lesser penalties for an abortion because the baby's not as, like, conscious yet or something. Personally, I think a life's a life. But, you know, I think that the difference between, I think there's a great difference between someone who became pregnant as a result of consensual sex and someone who became pregnant as a result of rape and incest. So this would be my theory. So if you commit an abortion as a result of voluntary sexual intercourse, personally, I think that should be considered a murder, okay? But if you have an abortion as the result of a rape or an incest, that's where we get into this trespass by necessity. And in that instance, I feel like the penalties for such an abortion should be less severe, but I still think that there should be penalties. And a lot of people will say, well, this method of yours, banning abortion, that's just going to drive it underground, and then people are going to do horrible things to get abortions. But this is one of those times where just because people drive murder under the ground or theft under the ground because it's illegal, doesn't mean that those things aren't horribly immoral and shouldn't be illegal, right? So in this instance, I just say, if you had consensual sex and got pregnant, you gotta have that baby, otherwise you're a murderer. Now, if you had non-consensual sex and got pregnant, that's kind of a different deal. Maybe it could be more like a slap on the wrist situation, where it's like, well, you as a result of force were put in this horrible situation, and so, you know, we'll give you a little bit of leeway. With all that being said, I don't think that these laws should apply retroactively to people who have had abortions while they're legal. Because they didn't know. They can't be bound by previous actions to that extent. So all of this stuff would have to be forward-looking in terms of how it's applied in policy. But, you know, if you can't send a grown man back out to sea because he's on your land illegally, solely for the reason that it would kill him, you certainly can't expel a baby from your property of body when such act will kill him, and think that that is not a wrongful death, or that's not actionable in any way, because that human that is growing in that womb has rights already. It's a human. It has individual rights. It's an individual. So you can't, it's kind of like tough titties, I guess, you know? It's not, the law is not made to make women feel warm and fuzzy inside. The law is made to serve justice. Oh God, is that the same fire truck? This really has not been a good day for recording, y'all. But yes, unfortunately, it's sort of a tough titty situation for all these women who want to be like, oh, but I'm not ready, I don't care, like I don't want an abortion, I don't know what to do. It's like, it doesn't matter, dude. It doesn't matter. Oh my God, this guy's on my land and he fucked up my dog. Maybe I'll just send it back out to sea to die. No. Yeah, look at this ambulance and see this. Oh shit, yeah, it's a lot of lights. Just because you're in a tough predicament does not give you the right to take away another human's life. Because the thing is, we're talking about property of body, that body, even when it's just a couple of cells, is still a body. It still exists. And there's property rights in that. And those property rights are not held by the mother, they're held by the individual in her womb. So, this is kind of my 2 cents on it. This is the extrapolation of my property law theory into practice. So, I'd like to hear what you guys think about this analysis, especially if there's any other attorneys out there. I would love to hear what you guys think of this whole idea of trespass by necessity is what an unwanted pregnancy is. Actually a pregnancy by force, because unwanted, you know, it's a little bit different than by force. I think that understanding property rights better will help us answer the question of abortion. And if we can come to understand a human's body as their property, including the baby, that body is his property, his or her property, then, you know, we can get to a better resolution on this. But if we want to start telling people that expulsion from the womb and viability, like, that's a whole issue, because viability varies based on what hospital you're in. So apparently whether or not you're alive depends on what jurisdiction you're born in. That makes no sense. And then there's some people who say, you know, well, only when it's gonna kill the mother. But it's like, well, that's one of those choices where it's like the mother's life is worth more than the baby's. I don't know. That's one of those things where it's a little bit more of a gray area, and, you know, I might leave it to the mother's discretion. If she has to choose between her own life and her baby's life, that's kind of tough. But in instances where, you know, you had a one-night stand and you regret it, that baby was welcomed into your womb. You know, you can't just say, oh, well, I don't want it there so I can kill it. You know, even if someone was squatting on your land and like building a house on your land, you can't just go out there and shoot them, right? You can't throw them into a pit of fire, right? Like, if someone trespasses on your land, there's remedies to deal with the damage of the trespass, but that's still another human life there, right? And I mean, I guess some of these crazy feminist pro-choice types will just say it's not a life. I'm not really sure what they define life as, but if they want to say that it's not a life until birth, well, it doesn't really matter, right? Because even if it's not a life, quote unquote, it still is an item that would have property rights in it. Someone owns property rights in that infant, and just because it's inside of the mother does not mean that she owns it de facto, right? If I swallow someone else's Rolex, it's not like it just becomes my Rolex, right? Because they bought it. They've got title to it, right? So just because something's inside of you does not mean you own it. And just because something's on your land doesn't mean you own it. And just because, I don't know. Let me put it this way. Even if you don't view it as a life, which makes no sense because you're terminating something. What are you terminating if it's not life, right? But even if you don't believe that what you're terminating is a life, you're terminating something, and that termination is owed certain rights, okay? The property that's being terminated has rights, okay? Even like, you know, I have rights in this camera, right? So if someone takes that camera and swallows it, it doesn't mean that they just own it and now can destroy it. It's my fucking camera, right? So I really think that abortion is one of these issues where no matter where life begins, and no matter what the state of the woman at the time, you just can't end a life because there's a trespass. And that's really all it is. An unwanted pregnancy is just a trespass. And you don't kill people for that. You can sue them, you might get some money out of them, you know, and I guess it's a little bit of a weird consequence, but in essence, a woman could sue her child if the pregnancy was unwanted, or, you know, the result of rape or incest. She could sue the child for the damages to her body or the lost time, or, you know, we could make an allocation for that if you want in the law, because that seems reasonable. But just to end the life is not. It's just not. So, but I appreciate everyone tuning in today for this car confessional. Please like and subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next one.
I just want to start a flame in your heart.